Thank you very much. So how many of you love getting parking tickets? That's what I thought. Me neither. Now here's the part that usually gets the reaction. I used to write them. Yeah, I know. People used to call me a meter maid. I hate that term. In my industry, that term is recognized as derogatory. It reduces a public safety role to a punchline. But that's what people saw, a meter maid. I get it. What they didn't see was why I was actually there in the first place. So as a college student, I was hired by the Santa Barbara County Sheriff's Department as a parking enforcement officer, and I was assigned to work in a little college town called Isla Vista. And for those of you who don't know where Isla Vista is, it's the little college town adjacent to the University of California, Santa Barbara. Go Gauchos. And Isla Vista was and still is one of the most densely populated 1 square miles west of the Mississippi. 1 square mile. Thousands of students, families, an active commercial district, narrow streets, cars parked bumper to bumper. Cars were everywhere, blocking the crosswalks, parked on the disabled access ramps, blocking the driveways. It was chaos. And you might think that I was hired to generate revenue. You might think I was hired to write tickets for sport. But the reality was, I was hired to make sure that the fire trucks could get down the street. Because when streets are that dense, access is not theoretical, it's life safety. Think about it like this. When we text and drive, and I did say we all know that we shouldn't do it. We are only thinking about our immediate convenience. We're not thinking about the risk that's involved when we're texting and driving. And often that's what happens when we illegally park. When you double park, you don't think about the ambulance that you might be impeding, or when you're parked on the crosswalk or on the sidewalk, you don't necessarily think about the wheelchair who you might be blocking access to. But believe me, if you were the one waiting for emergency services or trying to wheel yourself to an important appointment, you might think about it differently, especially considering some of the most recent disasters that have happened in our world today. I learned very early in my career that parking isn't about tickets. It's actually about access. Access for emergency vehicles, access for residents, access for your daily life. And here I am 35 years later, still working in parking and transportation, now as a consultant. The terminology's changed. Now we say things like congestion mitigation, demand management, curb optimization, all the fancy words and all the jargon, but it still comes down to access. Parking should be easy, convenient, and accessible. And accessible doesn't just mean physically reachable. It actually means equitable. Because every single vehicle trip you take begins and ends in a parking space. Remember that. You can't drive to work, you can't pick up your kids, you can't visit the doctor without interacting with the curb. And yet parking still feels like a gamble. You circle the block, you wait for a person to pull out, you sprint back to the parking meter, you see a ticket or you don't, and you think, I got away with it. That mixture, that feeling of risk, relief, luck, and frustration, that's how you're experiencing our cities today. Now here's what's interesting. The technology around parking has changed dramatically. License plate readers, mobile applications, digital parking meters. But the experience hasn't changed much at all because we digitized a system that was never designed around human behavior in the first place. And today, cities are under enormous pressure. We're trying to solve the housing shortages, so we want to reduce or eliminate the parking minimums that would have required a certain number of parking spaces for a new housing development. We want to reduce emissions, so we want less cars. We want to encourage patronage to our businesses, so we want more cars to park. And I'm pro-reform. I'm pro-parking reform. but reform has to be strategic and equitable. I know that driving is a privilege, but here in California, it's become a necessity. I work with public agencies across the United States, helping them to rethink their parking management and also to help them try to mitigate conflicts that are occurring at the curb. Recently, I was working with a community that had reduced parking minimums for a new development near transit, also known as transit-oriented development. Parking minimums can increase construction costs, they can lock in car dependency, they can increase rents. And the intent was good. When we reduce the parking minimums, ultimately, as the state law requires, here's what happens. The apartments were built, the parking was reduced, but the transportation alternatives, they weren't there. The buses stopped running at 8 p.m., no late night service. And this is in Southern California. People don't just hop on transit. They work 2 jobs, they commute 40 minutes at least. They rely on their cars because that's how their life works. I was at a community meeting and I met a woman who worked at a hospital. And she told me that recently she got off work at 11:30 p.m. and she got home from work and she couldn't find a parking space anywhere. She circled and circled and eventually parked over a mile away and walked home alone at midnight. That's not climate policy, that's not equity, that's policy outpacing reality. In a car-dependent United States, especially in Southern California, eliminating parking doesn't eliminate cars. It simply relocates the burden into neighborhoods, onto working families, into midnight walks home after work. This isn't about preserving endless parking. It's about sequencing. The removal of parking minimums is not supported along with mandatory transportation schedules. We can't remove access before alternatives exist. We can't outprice access to the curb. This isn't a concert venue. When you drive to a concert, you pay a premium for the best parking spot. That's private, profit-driven parking. Municipal parking is different. Public curb space is shared infrastructure, and it has to work for everyone. For the senior on a fixed income, for the disabled person who needs proximity, for the parent juggling 2 jobs. We can't design public access only for those who can afford the highest bid. Real reform isn't about moving fast. It's about aligning systems. Housing, transportation, curb management, economic vitality. These are not separate conversations. If we treat them that way, we create unintended consequences. But if we align them thoughtfully, we unlock opportunity. We don't solve the housing crisis by ignoring how people actually get to work. We solve it by sequencing change responsibly, ensuring that when parking minimums are waived, there are mandatory transportation alternatives available to support the community. And here's something that I've learned in 35 years. If you drive a car, you're a parking expert. Everyone is a parking expert, everyone. Whether you're weaponizing your trash cans to save a parking space for later, or using lawn chairs or cones, we've seen it all. How about during the busy holiday shopping season? Have you ever seen someone run and stand in a parking space? Are you kidding me? This goes against the cardinal rules of parking, right? First come, first serve. But it happens, and it does not usually end well. We've seen it all because many of us have a sense of ownership about that parking space outside of our business or outside of our home. People will fight for a curb space like it belongs to them because in a very real way, it feels like it does. Because parking is personal. It touches our daily life, stress, and safety. It touches our livelihood. Peter Drucker, the father of modern management, taught us that if we want to change systems, we must first understand how people actually behave, not how we want them to behave. People don't just respond to price. They respond to fairness and they respond to clarity, to whether a system feels designed with them or against them. When parking feels confusing or punitive, people resist. They circle longer, they double park, they risk it. But when parking feels predictable, compliance goes up, turnover improves, and businesses benefit directly. This isn't about enforcement, it's about trust. And this is why I think about parking the same way that I think about good management. Mission, measurement, people. For mission, what is the curb for? Is it for vehicle storage, economic vitality, or access? Parking should serve the community goals, not just revenue or punishment. And for measurement, what are we counting? Is it about the tickets? Or should we be measuring access or emissions? Or should we be measuring turnover? Because what we count reflects what we build. For people, does the system reflect reality? Parking works when it respects the human experience, clear rules, predictable outcomes, and dignity for everyone involved. This is how trust is built. When parking works, something remarkable happens. Businesses thrive, residents feel less stressed, cities move closer to climate goals without culture wars, public access feels welcoming again, and here's the big idea. Parking touches everything: housing affordability, business vitality, safety, equity, and climate outcomes. I started as a so-called meter maid, trying to make sure a fire truck could get down the street. That was it, access and public safety. 35 years later, I'm back in Isla Vista. Only now, I'm not writing tickets anymore. Instead, I'm sitting at tables with planners, residents, developers, and policy leaders, and we're trying to mitigate car density and trying to navigate new developments as they come online, many of which are without parking. There are more people, more units, more cars than ever. And we're asking hard questions. How do we reduce car dependency responsibly? How do we protect access? How do we reform parking without abandoning the people who still rely on it? Because reform isn't about swinging from one extreme to another. It's about alignment and it's about sequencing. It's about designing systems around real human behavior. 35 years ago, people saw a meter maid. What I saw were block lanes and emergency response times. Today, the terminology is different, the technology is better, and the politics are definitely louder. But the question is still the same. Can a fire truck get down the street? Can a nurse get home safely at the end of their shift? Can a parent pick up their child? Can a business survive? Those aren't parking questions, those are community questions. So when we talk about the future of our cities, let's stop treating parking like an afterthought, and let's start treating the curb as what it really is: shared infrastructure that shapes how our communities function. Because when we design our cities around access, dignity, and human behavior, we don't just manage cars, we make cities work. Remember your impact, because every vehicle trip you take begins and ends in a parking space. Thank you.